How do you build a single nation from ancient sultanates, a complicated colonial past, and a population that's just profoundly diverse? That's really the central question at the heart of modern Malaysia. So let's explore the key moments and big decisions that forged this truly unique country.
Okay, right off the bat, look at this. This isn't just data on a chart. It's a fundamental social equation Malaysia has been trying to solve since its creation. Seriously, almost every major political and economic decision in the country's modern history has been about managing the delicate balance that you see right here. So here's the roadmap for our story. We're going to start way back in the golden age of trading empires, then see how colonial lines were drawn to deliberately reshape society. We'll watch the birth of the nation and its defining crisis. Then we'll dig into the radical new bargain that came from the ashes, and finally, see how that balancing act is still playing out today. Now, before we go any further, there is one word you absolutely have to know: Bumi Putera. It literally means sons of the soil, and it refers to Malays and other indigenous groups. This concept, this idea of a special status, is totally central to understanding Malaysian politics and society, as you're about to see. All right, let's start at the beginning, with Malaysia's foundations. We're talking about the era of great trading empires, and specifically, the golden age of the Malacca Sultanate. So picture this. Around the year 1400, a port city is founded that would become the very heart of the Malay world. For a solid 100 years, Malacca wasn't just some city. It was a global powerhouse, a hub for commerce, and a real beacon of Islamic culture in the region. Its fall to the Portuguese in 1511 wasn't just a defeat, it was the sudden end of an entire era. And Malacca's success was no accident. It was basically a perfect formula. First, you had a strategic location that controlled a key shipping lane. Then you had a reputation for security, which brought merchants in. Add in a powerful alliance with China for protection, and, critically, its identity as an Islamic sultanate made it a magnet for traders from all across the Muslim world. It was just an unbeatable combination. Well, the fall of Malacca opened the door for a new power. And with the arrival of the British, the region's ethnic and economic map was about to be completely rewired, all under a classic policy of divide and rule. Now, British control wasn't some single big invasion. No, it was the slow, strategic creep over 130 years. The real masterstroke, though, was the Pancor Treaty in 1874. This set up the resident system, which put a British advisor in each sultan's court. Officially, they were just there to give advice, but in reality, that advice was binding. It was a really clever way to rule without ruling, and by 1914, their control was absolute. And this slide just illustrates the long-term consequences of that British policy perfectly. They essentially created separate economic worlds. The Malays were kind of steered towards government jobs and traditional farming, while immigrant Chinese and Indian labor was brought in to power the modern economy, the tin mines, the rubber plantations. The seeds of future tension, they were sown right here. So how on earth does a society that was deliberately divided by colonial policy become a single unified nation? Well, that's the story of independence, a story that starts with a lot of hope and is followed by a defining crisis. The road to independence in 1957 was paved by this really unique and honestly pragmatic bargain. You had a coalition of 3 separate ethnically based parties, and they all agreed on a formula: Malay political leadership in exchange for citizenship and the protection of economic and cultural rights for the Chinese and Indian communities. It was a deal, a pact made by the elites to create a nation. And for 12 years, that fragile bargain actually held. But then came May 13th, 1969. After a really bitter election, all those simmering ethnic tensions just boiled over into violent riots in the capital. The violence completely shattered the nation's founding ideals of harmony. It was a national trauma that proved the old model had failed. Everything had to be rethought. And out of that crisis came a truly radical new direction. This brings us to the New Bargain, one of the most ambitious social engineering projects of the 20th century, all shaped by something called the New Economic Policy and the vision of one man, Dr. Mahathir. I mean, just think about it. This was the monumental challenge facing Malaysia's leaders. The old ways had led to bloodshed. So how do you re-engineer an entire society's economy to fix historical inequalities without completely tanking that economy in the process? Their answer was the New Economic Policy, or the NEP. It had 2 really clear goals. First, lift everyone out of poverty, doesn't matter your race. And second, and this was the really radical part, was to restructure society to completely break that link between race and economic role that was a holdover from the colonial era. And this chart, wow, this chart shows you just how radical the NEP really was. In 1971, the Bumiputra owned a tiny 1.5% of the country's corporate wealth. The goal was to raise that to 30% in just 2 decades. I mean, this was affirmative action on a scale you've rarely seen anywhere else in the world. So, how did they pull it off? Here's the crucial part. It worked because the key wasn't just redistribution. It was massive economic growth. By averaging an incredible 6.8% growth every single year, they grew the entire economic pie. That way, even as shares were being reallocated, everyone's slice was still getting bigger. This strategy, growth with equity, was the secret sauce that prevented the kind of backlash that could have torn the country apart. And the primary architect of this entire transformation was Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, who really dominated Malaysian politics for decades. This quote, it just perfectly captures his complex vision. Use the power of the state to uplift the Bumiputra community, but with the very clear end goal that they would one day be able to compete on their own without needing any crutches.
Now, to push through such massive changes and maintain stability, Mahathir believed a strong, centralized government was absolutely essential. He saw things like an independent judiciary or the powers of the traditional Malay royalty as potential roadblocks to his development plans. So he systematically weakened their power and used tough security laws to silence any opposition. For him, it was a necessary trade-off. You sacrifice some democratic freedoms for the speed and stability you need for rapid economic transformation.
And all of that brings us to today and to our final section, the ongoing balancing act that really defines Malaysia here in the 21st century. You know, when you boil it all down, the entire modern history of Malaysia comes down to the tension you see on this slide. It is a constant, delicate balancing act between two incredibly powerful goals. On one side, that relentless drive for economic growth to compete on the world stage, and on the other, the non-negotiable, foundational commitment to social equity for the Bumiputra community. For over 50 years, Malaysia has walked this tightrope with a level of success that has honestly defied a lot of predictions. But in a world that's facing totally new economic pressures and changing social values, the fundamental question remains: can this unique formula, a formula forged in the trauma of 1969 and honed over decades, can it be sustained for the next generation? The balancing act continues.